Welcome everybody to a special edition of the SPS DAOn Hall. I'm going to be joined today by PJ, who is representing the Jupiter proposal to finish developing the SPS chain. And, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of questions from the community. I've done my best to kind of like gather the general questions to try to make sure we hit on everything, but I'm going to give you guys a heads up. Like, we have very limited time with PJ. He is actually a very busy and important part of the Splinterlands ecosystem. So, with that said, PJ, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? I know a lot of people don't know you.
I really appreciate it. And I do stay kind of in the backgrounds behind the scenes, but I'm the CTO of Splinterlands. I've been the CTO since the very end of 2022. And I think I'm the third because I know that there was Kevin before, and then we had Richard, and I came in probably pretty early, if I remember correctly, back in 2022 as the VP of engineering. And was brought on to basically help solve the scaling issues at Splinterlands. And if you guys are kind of long-term members, I guess that was at the height of Splinterlands, right? You come in and you see we had like 150 employees working at the company at the time. But yeah, I've effectively just been behind the scenes working on the infrastructure and working on product for the last few years. And I don't necessarily get a whole lot of opportunities to get in front of everybody because we're probably, for lack of better words, just always busy, heads down, trying to maintain the ecosystem and also develop the product. But yeah, I really appreciate it, Clay. And thank you for the opportunity too, for having me on. I think this is the first one-on-one I've actually had in front of the community since I've started, actually. I've been on a couple of the town halls, but for most part, just kind of kept behind the scenes, working vehemently.
Yeah,
So yeah, I appreciate it.
I think that was like the first hurdle that like I tried to help tackle a little bit. It's just like whenever people saw the proposal come up, it was kind of instantly like, who are these guys? Who are these randos? And I'm like, well, actually, I know exactly who that is. These aren't exactly randos.
Yeah, I mean, you and I spend a lot of time together talking about things that are happening with the tokens, and obviously developing markets and talking about solutions to a lot of the problems. But yeah, I'm not out here trying to really ever sell anything. I'm not out promoting any of the products. It's not really my position, and to be quite honest, like I'm not a major player in the game, although I do play the game. You wouldn't see my name popping up anywhere because I thought it was really important to me in a state where I didn't have any kind of financial incentive to interfere with any of the decisions that come in, which I think is really important, right? So yeah, you probably won't see me in the game that often, other than just checking workflows, checking work that gets done. So, but yeah, it's always good to get in front of everybody and do an introduction.
Yeah. Okay. Let me try to hit on like some of the questions because I know we've only got you for like half an hour, and like I said, there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of questions. I've tried to kind of like consolidate the big ones that I think people are going to want to know. So obviously, here's a big one. Who is Jupiter, and why should the DAO hire your team?
Yeah, so Jupiter's been around for a while. I think we formed the company a couple years before we came into Splinterlands. It's really just a contracting firm, right? So if you know my past, or well, I guess nobody here really knows my past, but back in 2016, I was the CTO for a company called Speaker, which was a multi-billion-dollar influencer management company. And similar to Splinterlands, we had people basically positioned all throughout the United States, but also in other countries of the world. So with that comes some legal hurdles for how you contract out work. Like if you have people that are in Europe, you have to pay VAT, and that every country kind of has its own issues that you have to tackle. So initially, we were a contracting firm for a lot of the out of country engineers that we worked with. And we would work on things like getting H-1B visas for our employees, trying to get them brought over here on work visas if they were students. We'd bring them over on student visas. But yeah, for the most part, it's just a contracting firm. It's not like it's out soliciting or trying to develop software or make a profit in the software space by releasing applications. It's not really meant for that. More or less, it's really just a contracting entity that we use. And we've used it at Splinterlands, actually. When I first started, we brought over quite a few engineers that were already a part of the Jupiter Corporation, because it's also very easy for Splinterlands to not have to hire W-2 employees if you have variable work that needs to be done. And so in that situation, it's easy to kind of have a separate organization that you can go to, contract work out, and get it done. And Splinterlands did this with quite a few different organizations in the past. I'm not going to speak directly to those because it had nothing to do really with Jupiter at all. But that's literally all it is. It's not a firm that you can actually go out and see software that we sell or anything like that. It's literally just a contracting corporation. That's it. And Jupiter is just a short form for Jupiter, the planet. That's it. So there's no special meaning to the acronym. It doesn't really have any kind of value in that sense. We chose it because it was just, easy. JPTR is like very simple to spell. So that was pretty much it. And if anybody has any qualms, it's a California corporation. It's an S corp that was formed. I think before that it was called Frostproof Heights, which again was just another meaningless name. So that's pretty much it. It's just literally a contracting corporation.
Okay, so I guess like another big question that a lot of people have is why is this work worth $500,000? Like how many developers are going to be involved?
Yeah, so we went through and spec'd out a budget, right? And here, like on my end, I've had to work with a lot tighter budgets, kind of paying for the sins of the father, as we would say. Since I've worked at Splinterlands, really all we've done is finish up projects that we have hardly really started any new ones since I've been the CTO of the company. So in a sense, what we try to do, at least on my end, is budget beforehand and say, hey, this is how much money we would like to set aside. And in that, you have contingencies, right? And so I know other people are going to come in. It's always easy to undercut a budget, especially if it looks like a large budget. But there's 4 of us that are working on this project, and it's all of the 4 senior infrastructure engineers at Splinterlands. So, you have Revity, Butcherblock, Slapshot, and myself, who are all a part of this project. But mind you, this isn't like covering our salaries or anything like that. In fact, all of us are coming on as contract to come complete this stuff. But we also have to maintain Splinterlands at the same time because we are the infrastructure team. So more or less, this is really a contingency, right? It's the most senior engineering staff from Splinterlands breaking off to finish and complete this project as contract work. And in the meantime, that's going to allocate a majority of our time, not all of our time, but a majority of our time, especially for 2 of these engineers. This is all that they work on 100% of the time, right? But this is the most senior level 3 engineering infrastructure staff that we have. These are all of our senior infrastructure engineers that are working on this. And I do want to be quite frank too. Like a lot of the work that was done beforehand on the Validators project was not specific to Splinterlands. It was actually specific to GLS, which is a completely separate project that, I'm not even really managing that project at all. It's not really a part of the Splinterlands dev team infrastructure, right? So I know that some people have had some qualms about work being done and work being said. It's really important to distinct the 2 differences between Matt and Aggie and the visions that they have and the way that they actually work, right? And so a lot of this was probably preemptively talked about by Aggie, but as you guys know, and people of the community are probably very familiar with, like, there's a lot of things that are just sold, right? And a lot of things that are said. And while that's going on, priorities shift, or actually I would say they used to shift all of the time because that's just the way the company was run, right? So Validators was always one of those things that was always top of mind and top of priority. And if somebody was working on it, it wasn't too easy for us to say that they could just focus on that primarily because a lot of things were happening at Splinterlands at the same time. Again, when I came in, the company had over 150 employees. But since then, it's literally been scaling down its operation. It hasn't been expanding its operation. So, there was a lot of things that were going on in the midst of Splinterlands because there was so many different projects that were being worked on. Whether you're for it, against it, it's not really my say. I'm the CTO, so I literally just have to act on what I'm told to do. But the priorities would shift all the time. So what we did was we broke off the senior engineering team actually a couple months ago, as soon as Matt took over, and Matt made this a priority. So the senior engineering staff has been working on this to finish the validators project, as a top priority. So that's kind of the difference here, right? So it seems like a lot of money to some people, but really it's kind of relative to the cost of engineering, the cost of development, especially for senior level engineers to come in and work full time on it. But there are a lot of things that people will say that they can do, and they can do it for a lot less, but they don't really understand what's happening in the development cycle, which we're hoping to open up too. Like our goal here is to open source all the work that we do as soon as possible. But we have to get it to a stage that we feel comfortable, right? And that's also one of the huge initiatives here, is to try to open source and create contingency plans for Splinterlands with infrastructure, with token management, all of those things, right? So other things that are kind of involved in this is, it's the development of the layer 2 network, as well as the integration for Splinterlands to run on top of that network too. So although I see people out there bidding and saying that they can do it for cheaper, I guarantee you that a lot of that comes with unknown costs that are kind of baked into this initiative, right? So with that being said, there's a lot of work that has to be done. I know that people are pretty hard up about the cost of doing this. Like I said, it's a budget, right? So we budget based on what we think we can accomplish, and we also put a buffer in there, right? And that buffer is designed to help us alleviate any kind of, as soon as we open up the product, there will be a lot more eyes looking at it. So there'll be a lot of things, just the unknowns, the things that you really don't see coming. And with the scale of Splinterlands, that also includes a lot of testing, right? So we have to spend a lot of time going through testing. We have to actually fire up machines. There's a lot of costs in the infrastructure side that we've taken care of for a long time that also is included in that. I think just even our Cloudflare egress bill is going to be something like $3,000 a month for us to put it in. Splinterlands obviously covers this cost for it, but those are things that people don't see behind the scenes that are all a part of this project. And Splinterlands already covers actually quite a bit of the lion's share of this, but I believe Matt's initiative here is really to just put some emphasis on the DAO having control and taking control of this very specific part of the project. So that is the development of the validators themselves and getting the code out to be open source. And then from there, supporting the project as well. And supporting means, you're going to have senior engineers that are going to be taking time to review code. As soon as we open source it, we're hoping that people will also contribute to the repositories, right? So you have to have some senior level engineering staff that's going to be focused on maintaining the PRs that come through. But hopefully we can get this to a point where the community can just run with it, and then it'd be fully open sourced here, in a relatively quick amount of time.
Okay, so I know we've only got you for limited time, but something you said there kind of like resonates with some of my line of thinking here. And, I think the initial reaction from most people was like looking at the dollar amount and, like thinking like, can we do it cheaper? I'm going to tell you what my initial reaction was. And I haven't really talked about this a lot because it's mainly just something that's kind of like been in my mind. But like, I'm more thinking about like bigger picture here of, you said the word contingency. And like in my mind, like that is actually exactly where my mind went because I know who these devs are. And I guess like what I want to know is hypothetically here, let's assume that it comes to some point where the DAO has to run the game. I don't think anybody wants to really go down that rabbit hole, but like in my mind, I'm always thinking about like to me the most important thing is the game survives, right? Like whether that means I don't have a job, whether that means Steam Monsters Inc. is gone. Like to me the most important thing is this game has to survive because there's so many people that have put so much into it. Like what are your thoughts? Like do you think that like having these devs working with the DAO are these like hypothetically like are these people that could keep the game running in a worst case scenario?
Yeah. So, yeah, let me explain to you um, so as CTO, I have to run through risk assessment every single year, right? There are different types of risks that we bear as a company. And so the first one is systemic risk. Then you have non-systemic risk. I'll give you an example. Systemic risk would be like overall financial market risk, adverse crypto market risk, sanctions, regional local conflict, and acts of God, right? And you have non-systemic risk, which could be volatility, counterparty, default risk, credit risk. Those are all terms used in non-systemic risk. Beyond that, you have operational risk, which would be things like protocol, treasury, front end and back end development, info security, sales and marketing, community, and then also the price of crypto and cash on hand, right? And then you have compliance risk, which I'm pretty sure everybody's very familiar with because compliance has been changing so much as of lately, but things include like taxation and regulatory compliance. You have legal risk, which is external legal risks, operating legal risks, and then DAO legal risks, right? So all of those different types of risks have to be observed, and you have to look at them with contingency. So in each one of those sections will have maybe anywhere from 3 to like 25 different things that we have to be aware of at all times, right? And I mean, you really have to understand the difference between Matt's line of thinking and Aggie's line of thinking. Like, Aggie is probably one of the greatest promoters that I've seen out there because he's a very charismatic, he's a very charismatic leader. He's out there trying to sell all the time. Matt is very different in the sense that Matt is very calculated. Matt is not out there trying to sell, but he's also, because he's not out there trying to sell, he's not trying to push promotions or push certain types of activity for people to participate in, right? And so he thinks more along the lines of how can I take care of Splinterlands, but also how can I take care of the community? And so when you sit down and you review all of the different types of risks and you realize that Splinterlands, the game itself, was designed to be a decentralized application, the goal here is to really try to provide as much decentralization as possible because it limits the actual systemic risks tied to Splinterlands, the game. But neither of those are exclusive. It's mutually exclusive. It's mutually inclusive to both of us to make sure that each is kind of in check with the other, right? The right hand has to know what the left hand is doing. In there, what you'll find is there's some ways that you can operationally detach parts of Splinterlands and make sure that it's available to the community as contingency all the time, right? So an idea behind this that's been thrown around is creating a perpetual license in case Splinterlands goes down for X amount of time. Let's say that it's in risk of being taken down by some external force, right? That the community has a fallback plan to launch the game and keep the game operational, right? And what do you need in order to do that? Well, you need an infrastructure team, right? So it is a risk on our end from the Jupiter side because in order to do that, we do have to have at least an arm's length separation on certain development features of it. But it doesn't mean that that also has to be completely independent. As it stands, like I'm still CTO of Splinterlands, right? I still have executive authority over operational decisions that are made behind, how we manage our databases, how we manage our infrastructure, what third-party services are provided by the DAO that are used by the community. For example, our open API structure that we have, right? So in order to protect the community and to make sure that the value of Splinterlands as the community is related to it is protected, you have to have a contingency. You always have to have contingencies, right? And it's not something that you hear too often, but all of the large DAOs actually have stuff like this in place to make sure that they can operate fully decentralized outside of any other governing body with some kind of contingency plan. So I guess you could kind of say this is baked into it. It wasn't really design or purpose of what we're trying to do here. Like, realistically, we're trying to finish validators as quick as we can to get it open sourced. But in that, you might want to consider the fact that these are completely separated from the company as of right now, not specific to that purpose, but it is possible to do, and it is something that the DAO should consider, right? Like, a perpetual license would mean that the DAO would have access to a repository or something like that that had all the operational code and the ability to restore from the chain, balances and everything of that sort, right, in order to keep running. But I guess you could say the word contingency is part of what should be thought about, but it is definitely something that the community should be thinking about, right? And so, I'm not here to dictate. I'm not here to put any proposals up. Like, I'm literally just focusing on exactly what it takes in order to get this done. After going through the numbers with Matt, this is the budget that we developed. Some people will have some sticker shock to it. I guess, it's pretty common. But you'll always have people say that they can undercut something in order to get the work done. We've seen this happen here at Splinterlands plenty of times, and it's kind of come back to bite us in the ass. But it's not like we're just a fresh ragtag team of people. Like, I'm extremely vested in the company, Splinterlands, right? So maybe I'm not a massive token holder, but my interest is in Splinterlands, the game, to make it successful, right? So I think this is a big step forward in the right direction.
Okay, I'm going to do my best to go over some of the questions, in a little bit, because I know we've only got you for a little bit of time. But yeah,
That's fine.
like I was saying, like in my mind, like that's immediately where my mind went whenever I read the proposal. Like to me, I'm thinking
Yeah.
like longer term, bigger picture. Like, does this mean, potentially the DAO is getting itself, set up to, essentially keep the game alive under any circumstances. I mean, I know we still have work to do, even if this proposal gets passed, even if we get the chain online, but I do think that getting a decentralized like L2, like that kind of like insulates us in case, like, hypothetically, like we're now looking at a scenario where we could be forced to like leave Hive or something, I mean, I don't think any of us really wanted to do that, especially like
I've
hearing
heard a lot
from
of that.
Matt.
Yeah.
But
It's
yeah,
like,
I mean, like things like this, like having a dedicated layer to, sorting out the license stuff. Like I guess some of this ties into getting a foundation set up. But yeah, like my mind is like always thinking about all of these things because, like I said, I'm always like in
mhm.
my mind, how does the game survive? But let me see. I got a couple more questions I want to hit on because I know you got to go soon. I think we touched on a lot of my questions just over the course of this conversation, but here's one big one that I know people want, and they're gonna say like I didn't ask you this, but like so there's people that are like legitimately feeling like this is just kind of like being forced on them that they don't really have a choice. Like responding to like Matt's response to peak monsters. And like they've been told, validators are in internal testing for like a couple of years now, and they want to know like when is the code going to be open source? Like when can they look at it? Like can you touch on some of these topics?
Yeah. So, first off, I don't really pay too much attention to the rhetoric behind the scenes for the most part. I just hear about it through third parties, and obviously the engineering team as it comes in. I'm more reactive to things that I'm told that have to be done. Right. I'm not dictating what needs to be done at all. So I'm not too sure if and why people would think that. I mean, isn't it up for vote? Like, isn't that the idea? Is that it's up for vote, right? So I don't understand how it's forced upon anybody. I mean, they're all considering, like, there are reasons why Matt would choose us over anybody else working on it, which for the most part just comes down to experience, right? And that these are the most experienced people on the team. But I can't speak too much as to why they would feel like this is being forced upon them. And I think it's a little bit different too, because if you think about like the DAO on its own, like the DAO to me is kind of more like acts like the Fed, right? Like it monitors and regulates things that are related to SPS, right? In this special circumstance for Splinterlands, like it does have some control over gameplay as well, which I think is also, if you think about it in theory, ties back to the value of the token, right? But just simply put, like there are infrastructure costs that the Fed has, right? Like I think everybody's familiar with the Fed trying to release a centralized banking digital currency, right? And there's just costs that are incurred by that, right? I'm not even sure that the DAO's position is to actually make money either. Like it should be to regulate the value or try to regulate the value of the token and control the token ecosystem. And that token has a voting share, or is the voting share of what happens in relation to the economics of the token, as well as some of the gameplay that happens on Splinterlands. So I like, as far as it being forced, I'm not really sure. I mean, Splinterlands again should be a separate entity from the DAO. So however you want to look at it, Matt as CEO can react to things the way that he wants to react. But all in all, that's the way that that's my position in this. And then as far as open sourcing the code, but our goal is to open source it as soon as possible. But I will say that there is a lot of stuff that comes with that, and I'm not going to call it baggage for the most part, because it's not. We think that we can be progressive with this, but the team just needs to get it to a point where we can open source it right now and open it up to everybody, right? And with that, we have to do some internal testing, right? Again, I'm happy to speak as to why it's been said it's been worked on for so long, but for the most part, we feel like we had to redo a lot of the work that was done, because I think when Aggie would talk about it all the time, he was talking about work being done as a double front for stuff on GLS, but that's not this, right? That's separate. So, and again, like, you really have to look at the management style between Aggie and Matt and just understand the difference between the two of them, right? Whereas, certainly, like, we're still working on projects that were sold, right? Like, I don't even really think there's many projects that I've been a part of that have started at Splinterlands. Most of the work that I've been doing is really just kind of paying for the history of things that were done in the past, right? Which we're getting close to wrapping up, which is good. But let me digress. Our focus is to open source this part of the project and to open it up to the community. This is the budget that we have set aside, and that we're asking for the DAO to cover costs that are all related to the infrastructure of maintaining the token and maintaining the ability to validate and transact in the ecosystem, right? So it's an infrastructure cost related to the activities that the DAO should be doing. And so, Splinterlands has paid for a lot of this stuff in the past, and this is really just a good opportunity for the DAO to contribute to the development. And they do, like, again, you guys do have the option to pick and choose who you want to work on this, but after years and years of doing this, like, I do have to say that Splinterlands has contributed quite a bit to the DAO, even though the community has contributed quite a bit to Splinterlands. These two things are inherent, right? And they do work hand in hand. And I can tell you right now that these are the best engineers for the job.
Okay, I think that's good, and I think I think you did a good job making your case. Like I said, there's people that obviously have reservations. I tried to touch on the big points, and I think we touched on most of, like, the actual questions I had. Like, I was kind of like more. I guess more of my questions were like more logistical, like, why is this a 1 year contract? But I mean, it seems like part of it is like, we want to get this thing out ASAP, but one of the things that, like, I was, under the impression of too, is like, you don't want to just push out, everything and then not support it. So even if it is open source, even if there are, like, a lot of community developers that want to jump in and work on this thing, you still need somebody managing the, pull requests in the repository. You still need somebody, like, basically auditing and checking, making sure nobody, like, slips in something that's gonna, either create an exploit or, something malicious. There's definitely, I think, like, I'm not like an expert, but I think I have a better understanding of how some of this stuff works than a lot of people. So, like I said, I didn't really balk at the price so much. Like, my mind went more to, like, what can we get? And if this gets us closer to what I think is, like, ultimately the most mission critical thing, which is the DAO having the ability to keep Splinterlands alive regardless of what comes in the future. I mean, to me, that's no brainer. Like, to me, that's like all I
it's
think
kind of the
about.
whole point, right? Like, the success of Splinterlands equates directly to the success of the DAO, and the success of the DAO equates specifically to Splinterlands. Like, that's kind of why it's really just a partnership that has to be well, actually, let me back up. There has to be trust, right? Like, without this, and if we've completely broken the trust and the will of the community, then that's Splinterland's fault. But I don't think we're there yet, right? And yeah, Splinterlands is still going through its inflationary cycle where we're releasing a lot of tokens. The token prices are always getting hammered, right? And I know the sentiment that comes with that, but to be honest, in the long-term scheme of things, like, it's very typical in crypto, right? Like, we go through these volatile boom bust sequences that tend to follow a 4-year pattern. And if Aggie were on here, he would tell us about the Wyckoff accumulation, which is kind of a joke inside, because not saying that Aggie saying it is a joke, but we're all familiar with it at this point, because there's so much regularity that happens in this market where these boom bust cycles happen, right? And before the last time prices took off during COVID, people forget that ETH had dropped down to I think it was like $160 or even less than $160, and then it shot up to $5,700 really not that far after. And we've all kind of been through it. If you're long-term Bitcoin holder, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So these are just kind of inherent with the market itself. And in crypto, it's too also has a lot of soul seeking and soul searching to do within the community, and people that come and go for all the right and wrong reasons, right? But that, Splinterlands isn't like that. And the game has a lot of things that need to be fixed. Like, I can tell you right now, my focus, because for a long time, this company was focused on releasing new product, right? And what you do is you just layer cake all these things on top of it. Well, with Matt's initiative, we're trying to go through and fix all the mission critical stuff right now that literally interprets to improving the price of the token, right? Like, I can tell you right now, mobile is broken. Like it is something I've been so frustrated with, just getting the time and the engineering team to have no new initiatives to focus on things like mobile, right? And we all know how the mobile app experience was, and we chose to close that down because the costs for maintaining that were far greater than anything we're spending on validators, right? The tutorials are broken, right? Like, if you go on mobile and you try to launch a tutorial, dude, you can't get through it. Like, it's ridiculous, right? And again, we're very aware of these things, and we know that things have to change. It's literally finding budget, scope, and time to pull people off of other projects that were, things that were committed to before I was even CTO, right? And then just general onboarding, right? Like, we want to be able to bring in new players and make sure that it's a seamless experience, right? It doesn't even make sense to spend money on marketing until those things are fixed, right? So I think it's really important that people understand that, the general interest here is to make things better for everybody, right? And in doing so, we'll have to go through and check all these boxes off, and validators is a big one, right? Validators is actually the largest one that we have. But in order for us to also continue to provide free API services, and for us to have a market that has no fees that really are equated to Splinterlands making money on the markets, and to allow these other third-party markets to operate, these are the kinds of things that we have to do. And, every once in a while, it may be the case where Splinterlands has to go to the DAO and say, hey, look, this is the responsibility of the DAO. Just as the DAO has a say in what Splinterlands should do in the game, Splinterlands should have a say in certain aspects when it comes to these types of projects. But again, we actually really don't. We rely on you guys to make the decision. So it's really important that people understand what they're getting, right? And I know a lot of people look at this as like an investment, right? Like, the DAO is investing in a product, but it's not. It's not really an investment. It's kind of a responsibility, and the responsibility will come with some liability too, right? If the DAO is managing validators for its own tokens, right, then it needs to make sure that these things are in lockstep, and there has to be a team of people that can regulate that. Simply, Ethereum Foundation and other foundations also have a very similar setup where they have their core internal team that go through and review everything. They keep everything above board, right? But we should be doing the exact same thing. There should be progress being tracked and monitored by third parties. There should be a GitHub repository that's open that people can see. And on that front, I think it's a really good opportunity for the DAO to take some of that inherent risk away from Splinterlands the game, and to basically manage its own portion of the project, which is really a great contingency for it to have as well. So
Okay, so let's just
I'll leave it at that.
just to wrap up, touch on one point
Yeah.
here. So I know earlier you said like basically 4 devs are included in the cost of like the budget that you guys scoped out.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make sure I understand, and like other people. So this is like essentially 2 people that are going to do nothing but build out the infrastructure for the SPS chain.
Yeah, and
Um,
they've actually been working on it for months already too. So that you're not that's not inclusive to this. It's not like they're starting from ground zero.
Okay, and basically, like the other two are essentially working on the Splinterland side to integrate. And I'm going to touch on like because I can answer some of these questions from the audience
Uh,
after you jump off. But
there's very yeah, and I just want to touch point on that too. It's not that they're working just on the integration side, but if you had for time percentage, there is a percentage of it that is going to go to integrating with Splinterlands, and it's also Splinterlands also carries a cost of managing the integration to the validator from the game, which is outside of a lot of this. I mean, we have to prepare the game to run on top of this after testing too, and that's not included in this cost necessarily, although I think people will think it is. Um, but that requires, and honestly, if the communication is not good there, the communication breaks down very, very fast, especially when you have external teams trying to integrate with an already operating team that has its own set of initiatives that are outside the initiative of this project. So I want to be very, very clear.
yeah, I mean, I know that there's also like basically like onboarding time anytime you bring on new devs. That's something that like I saw us like
Yeah,
run into whenever we started trying to like rapidly
it's
expand. It's just like
yeah.
higher,
Just
higher,
because
higher.
just because it looks good on paper doesn't necessarily mean the math checks out, right? So,
Yeah.
although there are some people here who I believe have the best of intentions. Like I spent a lot of time working with Wolf in the past, and I think he's a great engineer. You know what I mean? I don't know how the relationships are between people, but I do listen to people when they come to me and they have qualms, and I do take it to heart, right? And I guess listening is one of my better skills here to see what happens. But I do have to keep at least an arm's length separation from all the chatter that happens in the background.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't want to be like, in the weeds just dealing with complaints in Discord all day. I get it, like, because, like, the devs need to actually be deving and not just, talking to people. But, I do appreciate you took the time to come and talk about this stuff. I think it gives me a lot more to think about. And, like I said, I can answer a good bit of the questions from, listening to the town hall yesterday. And, like I have a basic understanding of this stuff, but I'm definitely glad to hear that. I think this moves us in the direction of the DAO being able to essentially like make sure that Splinterland survives. I know there's still going to be more work on that, but like I said, that's always what's in my mind is like how does the game survive any scenario. And I mean, like to me, that's like regulatory, that's infrastructure, that's worst case scenario with the company. Like in my mind, like that's literally what I think about all the time. Is like how can I help the DAO get into a position to where Splinterlands lives,
Yeah,
regardless.
as it should be, as it should be. You know what I mean? You are the caretaker of that, right? So, um, I really appreciate it. Yeah. So again, feel free. I mean, I'm very happy to hop on and talk with the community. I know that we have a limited amount of time today. It is a Friday, and I have to hop on with our CFO for the time being, or our temporary CFO. But I really do appreciate it, and I hope this does answer some of the questions for the community. And again, I really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. I understand the concerns completely, but we're trying to be a board, and we want to open this up to everyone. So I hope this helps sway the tide and makes you guys feel more comfortable. And I really do appreciate it again, Clay. Thank you for having me on. And if you need me to come back on, I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, awesome. I'll see how things go, and I'll be in
Okay.
touch. But yeah, definitely appreciate you coming on, man. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I'll see you later. Bye.
Okay, guys, let me try to like quickly touch on some of the questions from the audience. Like I said, I kind of had to hurry here because I only had like a 30-minute commitment. I know he has like important meetings that are, it's hard for me to get time with people on that level. But like, let's see, how many percent of the software has been done? And okay, so Lewis, he actually touched on this early on. Like the thing is, like there was like original development done, and then Genesis League was basically developed in tandem with basically like with the software. So it's like it's very easy to say like it's running for Genesis League but not for Splinterlands. But like you got to remember, Splinterlands existed for like 5 years before any of this code got created. So I'm like what he was saying and what I've been kind of like thinking in my head is that, you know, like there's a lot more work to go on to repurpose existing stuff to you know, basically make Splinterlands work with this. But let's see, when will the code be made public? Yozen, I've been pushing for that since this proposal came out. I've been talking to Matt personally. I've been like reaching out to PJ. My understanding is they're trying to get that done quickly. I believe, like I listened to the town hall earlier today while I was working on some other stuff. I think like one of the things Matt was pointing out is like there could be like potential like security concerns. Like they have to go through this stuff and make sure that it's like ready to be public facing, and you know like it's not gonna like expose anything that could like hurt Splinterland. So I mean I yeah, I mean like obviously I wish it was like ready because that's one of like my biggest gripes about this whole process is like that code should have been ready to be open sourced. Let's see. 500K to open source it. Like we kind of already touched on all this, Lewis. Like it's more than just open sourcing it. It's having 4 devs support this for like a year, and like basically we're locking them in for a year to where we know they're gonna still be here. Basically, well, I mean, I guess barring you know life events or something, but then I guess we'll deal with that if it comes. Yeah, dude, DeJoda, PJ is actually awesome. Like, I've had to work with him for, like, some of the ETH stuff. Like, he's trying to help us bridge the token to new chains. He's helped me with the audit. That's kind of like how I know him. I didn't really work with him much whenever I was an employee, but I have had to get a lot of help from him with, like, the audit stuff and trying to basically just get into a position to where maybe we can see SPS like on Solana, maybe we can see SPS on like Base, you know, all the EVMs. Let's see. Why is it important to have SPS Chain? I think we touched on a lot of that. To me, the biggest one would be Splinterland surviving. Um, yeah, yeah, I can kind of see that the way Matt worded the proposal. You know, I think some of this stuff would probably do better with more public discussion, but also, you know, like part of the problem here, and like this is something that I noticed like after the discussion got opened, is like, you know, I'm not trying to say this to like be mean, but like there's a lot of opinions that like just genuinely don't understand like the scope of development work, and I think a lot of people just look at the number and balk, and you know, I can't tell you exactly, you know, I can tell you for a year getting 4 devs for that price. I mean, especially like high end devs that can build out infrastructure, like that's not a bad deal in my opinion from what I've seen. Yeah, like the purpose of getting the SPS chain would be that like you know eventually like the NFTs and everything live on that chain. My understanding is basically, you know, and this is one of the things that I was kind of like pushing him on, is like this is like the next step in the process of making sure that Splinterlands can live on, regardless, you know, like regardless if Hive is gone, regardless if Steam Monsters Inc. is gone. I mean, I think we still have several more steps in that process, but this is a big one. Getting the data decentralized and like in our control is a big thing for the DAO. What happens when the game, man, that's an opinion. I'm not, okay, let's see. A lot of off topic. Yeah, you know, he definitely kind of like has a little bit of like a waxing philosophical there. Let's see. What can the community do to help facilitate having the DAO take over? You know, TK, I think this is part of it, obviously, but you know, it's like I think there's a lot of questions that people are going to have to figure out long term because it's not just like SPS Chain exists. It's slightly more complicated than that because like I dealt with this with Steam and to some extent like Hive whenever like the fork was happening. It's not just like people running nodes. Like it's slightly more complicated than that. Like you'll have people running like basic nodes, but you also need people that are going to be like running like the big RPC nodes where like you're basically calling most of the data. You know, I'm not an expert in this department, but like this is a good step in that direction, I think. Yeah, what about removing SPS in the DAO? I guess go make a proposal, Lewis. I don't know what to tell you. You can ask the DAO to dissolve itself. Um, let's see. Yeah, looks like we touched on everybody's questions. Like I said, guys, if there's like big demand, he seems like he's willing to you know come back and try to talk to you guys again. Like I don't know how else to say it. Like he's a pretty busy guy to get time with because, like I said, I've had to get time with him to work on some of the audit and like SPS stuff. But hopefully I was able to get most of you guys' questions answered. I was kind of hoping we had more time, but whenever I talked to him this morning, he was like, I've got 30 minutes basically, and I'm like, okay, well, let's make it work. DeJoda, that's I'm telling you, man, like that is literally the question that is always on my mind. Like, I know it's not something I talk about a lot, honestly, because I don't think it's like a very happy topic. But yeah, like literally, if you want to know like what is on my mind, like day in, day out, it's like I'm generally thinking like how does the DAO become self-sustainable? And part of that is like I think we have to get to a place where the DAO can generate enough revenue to keep itself afloat, basically. I obviously this is like a big expense, and I think a lot of us would rather us not be thinking about shelling out $500,000 right now, but you know, um, obviously, like I said, decentralizing the data, getting the DAO into a position where it controls this stuff is pretty mission critical. Now, obviously, there's like more to it than that. It's not just getting like the NFT data and everything. We also have to figure out like the actual game data. But I do think that if we have like four of the infrastructure devs that basically build and maintain Splinterlands working for the DAO, that kind of like creates a position to where hypothetically if things go wrong, we at least know who to get in touch with and who to contract to help us get the game online and keep it running. So yeah, I mean, like I said, it's obviously this is a complicated issue. I can't tell you guys this is the way forward, but like I said, when I know a lot of the initial reaction was like about the money. Can somebody do it cheaper? But like I'm telling you, like the first thing that clicked in my mind is like, does this get us to a place where hopefully the game can live on regardless? Like obviously we know the company's been struggling a little bit. I think Matt's a lot more conservative than Ag. So like whenever Matt's like talking about runway and stuff, I think Matt is like overly cautious, whereas I think Ag was like a little bit more overly ambitious. And I think the truth, like the balance is probably somewhere in the middle, right? So I think like ultimately things are all right for now, but I still like in my mind it's always I don't like to be doom and gloom. I try not to get into this stuff, but it's always on my mind, right? Like to me, that's the most important thing is that I want the game to survive, whether or not I'm here, whether or not the company exists. Like to me, that's the most important thing, and I think that like we all kind of have to have that mentality with this DAO. Is that we need the DAO to get into a place to where it can ensure the game survives, right? And I think that that's more important than worrying about a lot of the stuff that we worry about. But hopefully that'll help, guys. I don't see any more questions. But like I said, I will do my best to get PJ back on if you guys need more time with him, and I will drop a link to the recording. Thanks, guys.